start. First, I want to say a few words about the FAIR project. So for those of you who don't know, the FAIR project is owned by the Kvarkenrådet, the Kvarken Council here, and is about preparing this region for an early implementation of electric aviation. We aim to increase the knowledge base about electric aviation, investigate what possibilities there are, what needs exist, and what investments we need to do. And it's really the first step towards trying to see how we can introduce electric aviation within this region. My name is Jeroen Peeters. I'm a senior design researcher at RISE, Research Institutes of Sweden. We are responsible for work package 3, which includes a cross-border innovation process to challenge and innovate around electric aviation in the region, as well as this series of webinars and other events connected to the competence network. Then there is Biofuel Region, responsible for work package 2, guidelines for implementation of electric aviation within the region, and finally UMU University and the University of Vasa that are looking at the regional effects of electric aviation. The project is managed by Jeroen, and at the end of today I will share with you contact information for those of you who would like to get in touch and discuss specific things on the basis of what you hear today or have heard in other discussions and meetings. The Quarken region, for those of you who are geographically less familiar with us, is the narrowest part of the Gulf of Bothnia, the Swedish and the Finnish side. It is interesting because it has a very short distance between coast to coast across the Baltic Gulf. I think worth mentioning today also is that there is an intention to extend this project and this network within the region, and this is also one of the reasons why we have 2 Norwegian representatives with us today. The last thing I want to say about the project in general is that we are very fortunate to have a broad range of financiers from both the public and private sector on the Swedish and Finnish side that are financing this project together with the Interreg Body Atlantica, and also a wide network of supporting partners that are relevant and helpful in exploring this topic together. But you can find more information about all of this within our website. Right, so then I think we can introduce the program for today. The first speaker we have with us is Dr. Engineer Sigurd Øvrebø. I'm very sorry, Sigurd, for my Norwegian. It's even worse than my Swedish.
Works perfectly fine, don't worry.
Thank you. Sigurd has obtained his PhD from the Norway University of Technical and Natural Sciences in electric engineering, if I remember correctly, and has a long career in the technical leadership at Smart Motor as CTO, but joined Rolls-Royce some years ago as now being the managing director for a new entity focusing completely on electric and sustainable propulsion, I guess. It's the best way to put it. I think you will tell us a little bit more about that in your talk entitled Hybrid and Electric Aviation, Solutions in Fuel Production and Alternative Fuels. We've scheduled about 25 minutes for you. If you go a little bit over, that's completely fine. If you are a bit quicker, that's also fine. We tend to be a little bit flexible in these webinars, and there will be time for questions afterwards that I will moderate. So with that, I think the digital floor is yours, Sigurd. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'll just see if I could share now my presentation. There's too many options here at the first glance. Let me see if I...
No worries, this is always a difficult moment. You need to take control.
Actually, I found it. I had 3 or 4 other presentations up, so this one anyway. I changed a little bit the topic actually, but similar. So I called the topic Sustainable Aviation from Fuel to Trust. So I changed a little bit into today's topic. So let's see. So first, a little bit about Rolls-Royce, our business, what we're doing. So mainly we have 3 businesses in Rolls-Royce. So the first business is our civil business, and here typically we work with engines for aircraft. So for us, we are on 35 different types of commercial aircrafts, and we lease out the engines. So we have like 13,000 engines around the world that we follow up. Is our base. So around half our people work in this business. Then we have the power systems business. It's a little bit different. So here we have 2 factories, one in Norway actually, Bergen Engines, and one in Germany. And here we are producing around 20,000 engines per year, and this is about 20% of our people working here. For our defense business, is more like the civil ones. We have about 150 customers in over 100 countries, and again our business here is around jet engines. So we have about 16,000 engines here that we service maintenance around the world. So again, it's about 20%. So then we're lacking 10%. So that's the hub. So we have also a hub of innovation where I'm actually working. So that's the last percentage of people is oriented there. Little bit on our commitment. So our commitment is this net zero emissions by 2050 within our sectors. So the reason I showed you a little bit the different businesses that we have is also that is our background going into it. So we do have the experience from jet engines. We do have the experience with our diesel business with actually power generation. So with that basis, we think we have an excellent position to work with our 2050 goal around net zero emissions. So I'll talk you through a little bit the different aspects of that today. So let's see how we do now in these stages. So for us, the electrification is not a new thing in Rolls-Royce. So for myself, I've been working with these kind of systems for about 20 years. But here's some pictures, just some what kind of products are we historically been working with. Well, up to the left, you can see a train solution. This is typically through our diesel factories in MTU. I mean, then we manufacture some sets, that's hybrid sets, where we combine the electric and diesel. So also for the marine sector, we historically worked within offshore marine. Now, after the sale with the offshore marine to Kongsberg, we more work into the yacht market and the tug market and other markets, but also here long history of full electric or partly electric systems. And then lower left, maybe more surprisingly, other sectors that you should think maybe they're very conservative around, for instance, submarines. And we see that they already have done the transition. So they are actually, to a high degree, very much electrified and have been it for quite a while. To the lower right, you can see when we work with these power systems, it's not only the diesels, but it's typically how to actually phase in other kind of energy sources. So with the diesel as a backup, you could then work with other, for instance, renewable powers into the grid, and then go with your diesel as the backup to just make sure that you actually can deliver at all times. So the businesses are changing, and this lower right one is quite exciting for us in the power systems market. I would say that what we've seen in these transitions into hybrids, typically fuel savings are 15 to 50%. And that's very similar when you start looking into the first aircraft and look at hybrid solutions. We sometimes see actually some similarities, both in the ways we build it up and also in some of the numbers going also into the aviation. I want to mention this one. It was a couple of weeks or almost a month ago now. It was a sale that we did up in the north of Norway, where we had a battery pack. So it doesn't sound very exciting, but this is a little bit what we're looking at here. So our traditional deliveries has been around maybe backup power with a diesel, or it could be for some airports like in Rome and Czechia. 2 or 3 airports actually have all the airport power delivered like this from a diesel genset. So what we're looking into now is a little bit, okay, we also work with the charging system and the systems on board the aircraft. So this is now, we're now looking a little bit how should we use this in an airport supply. So for us then, these deliveries up north in Norway is quite interesting, because here it's about a fish farm. So they have some fish farm with weak grids, and they're using then batteries, some megawatt hours, to support the grid up there. So with that, they could be more stable and have a trustable power source. So of course there's similarities up north in Norway with remote places where we are thinking we might want to use this competence and these products also around airports. So then to the key areas when we're talking about sustainable aviation. So in Rolls-Royce, we are looking at the total picture. So this is the nice thing when you have the gas turbine competence and products, and at the same time doing, for instance, this new electrification runs, then you can have that overview and have an opinion on how can we move ahead. So for us, the first key topic is the gas turbine. So for us, we see actually 2-digit kind of numbers here. How can we improve the efficiency of a gas turbine? And then some people might say, well, why do you want to spend money on this? I mean, this is, you should use all your money on electrification or hybrid systems. But for us, it's actually quite key that we continue here to work on this technology and continue to do those improvements. So we will then see, I think, spillover effects later in this presentation as well. If you could do 10% better on your gas turbine, that has quite significant impacts on other areas when we, for instance, look at the hybrid system. Then in the mid here, around fuels. So we definitively work on fuels. So we both work on the way the fuel is being made. And that goes all the way back to what kind of power source are we looking at here to create those fuels. On the gas turbine side is more about how will it look when we start burning these fuels. So here we have quite a lot of cooperation, both with the suppliers, but and then testing this out in our engines. So right now, I mean, we're looking into just burning 100% of this fuel. So how will that look? So it is also quite important for the full journey into sustainable aviation. To the right, then we see this example around electrification hydrogen. So definitively, we do have a lot of activity there. I'll show you more details later on. But here is one of the new areas within the company where we don't have historically a lot of experience within aviation, but we do have a lot of experience within other sectors that we are now using to progress within aviation as well. This slide just showing 3 of the areas where we are quite active, marketing and also development here. So historically, we've been working with these small propeller aircraft. These are mostly demonstrator programs. It has been quite easy to see that if we changed a small aircraft, it makes a lot of sense in terms of complexity of the system, but also the competitiveness of that product, because it's cheap. You know, here in this aircraft, the portion of fuel into this aircraft is very low. So here you can actually make the change, and the business case sits quite well here in terms of this product in this market. But not many people on board, so 1 to 4 persons, and power is maybe between 50 and 300 kilowatt. So this is a small aircraft with not so many people in it. In the middle here is a picture of the eVTOL. So historically, we've been active here with City Airbus together with our partners there, and we had motors and drives delivering power to that experiment. But now we're into the next phase, and it's quite exciting here to see this is potentially a big market, but there's a lot of buts and ifs. It means that around the pilot, can it be autonomous? How will this work? So there's a lot of questions around it, and also the range. What's the right range here? Can we have a short range? Does it make sense in bigger cities? And there's a lot of discussions around infrastructure, and so it's super exciting in terms of market size potentially, but there's also a lot of questions around this eVTOL market. Again, 1 to 4 persons. This is why it's so important around, if it's going to be a pilot or not. And power, we need more power here. It has to be this vertical takeoff that drives a little bit of power need here. So that's typically up to 1 megawatt propulsion power for these units. The last market I want to mention here is the commuter markets. So here we've been working a bit around solutions up to 19 seaters, and then powers here we're thinking up to around 2 megawatt. So also here has been quite a lot of activity with different kind of systems, being it a battery or being it any kind of fuel cell or other kind of energy sources here. So it's been quite a lot of demonstrators and test programs here, but now we are starting to see the next phase, the commercial contracts coming up. So I'll show you a couple of those in the next slides now. So last month it was the first news here around this eVTOL. So this is a company called Vertical Aerospace. So here we have actually entered now the first commercial contract for us in Rolls-Royce, where we plan then to develop the system for this customer. So the idea is then to have a 4 passengers kind of vehicle with 120 miles range and a cruise speed of 200 miles per hour. And also kind of an aggressive target to have this ready in 2024. So this is a massive challenge just to have this technology ready, but also to have it ready in a way it can be qualified as a product. So this is really what's happening now. 2 days later, after this news, we had another news around commuter. So here we've been working a while in Norway together with Avinor to see, what can we do here and what kind of stages can we take here to approach the new normal for aviation in Norway. So in this press release, it was all about the position here, Avinor as the launch customer for this Tecnam aircraft that we've been working with. So this one is a full electric aircraft. We're still working on the specification here. What's going to be the length of the flight, but this work has to be done quite detailed together with Avinor to see where does it make sense to experiment and test with this one. But initially we've been thinking about the north, the short takeoff and landing routes. There's opportunity up north, and potentially also in the west, where we could do some operations with this aircraft. Intention here is also quite aggressive, so to have something here in 2026 commercially, that's also quite aggressive paced for us and also for the aircraft maker. The good thing here is that this aircraft is a new aircraft, so it's already certified as an aircraft. So that is again the nicest starting point we could find. If you want to go quick in the market, this was our idea then all right, let's have a brand new design, and then we will then have the first battery operated solution with this one. It's nice to see that news, how quickly it spreads. That was why I pitched in. We had a Norwegian E24 article, and it spun out to the US in Forbes and immediately in Germany, everywhere we could see this news. So there's a lot of attention around the Nordics and what we're doing. So I think that there's a lot of people thinking that stuff will happen in the Nordics. So I think that's quite good as well. I mean, we should just continue talking about this, and it will happen in the Nordics first. So that's a good thing. Then some words around Trondheim. So earlier we've been talking about the EFANX program. We're working with a 2.5 megawatt system that we intended to fly together with Airbus. We stopped that program, and it didn't make sense to go ahead with the flight. I mean, with the COVID situation, it made more sense for us actually to go ahead with the ground test. So that's what we've been doing ever since. We've been building and testing this one in our facility in Trondheim. And later this year, the plan is to test it with the gas turbine in Bristol. So the basic idea here is to start that journey into the regional market. So we talk about commuter market, but we also need to address the needs in the regional market. Here's more of an open question, how the solutions will look. But we do have an idea that we need this megawatt kind of capability for that market to go ahead. And I need to mention here also, this is still, there is a partnership with AT in the UK and the Clean Sky 2 for this activity. Even though it's not the EFANX program, we will continue with the same funding out this year. Then I want to mention some options, because it's often there's a confusion around, let's say, the press release with Airbus, and they talk about hydrogen. What does it mean? So a lot of people think about whether maybe it's a fuel cell, or but of course there are always at least 3 options here, and this goes for most fuels. So the top option, of course, is an opportunity. You could make use a fuel cell and make electricity, and then have an all-electric solution on the wing. I mean, this is a lot of smaller aircraft talking about this. Maybe they could change the battery, put in this kind of system instead, and have a better range. So that's a lot of activity going on that. Then there's 2 other options. So let's see here, if you combine something on the wing, that you have burn maybe most of the content, and then you have some kind of a electric combination here. In marine, this is perfectly normal. This is what we call a PTI PTO in marine. So this we have used for 20 years already, but this might have some benefits. So this is one of the things people are looking into. And then the last one, of course, you could just burn it directly in a turbine. So with these 3 options, they typically fit for different kind of ranges. So smaller aircraft, so this has been investigated. Intermediate, this is typically been investigated for intermediate ranges, and longer ranges, maybe this is the more brown one. So 3 different solutions that fit different needs. But this is, I think, what a lot of companies are now looking into and exploring. So this is just the same thing with a little bit of okay, what kind of ranges are we thinking about? So we see that sustainable aviation fuels definitively needs to be part of the solution when you talk about longer ranges. We are not completely sure about hydrogen. What is going to be the place in terms of ranges and aircrafts, but it looks like it will have a role. So this is burning hydrogen, and then the red one here is fuel cells. If we convert it into energy, electrical energy, I mean, yes, probably there will be some solutions with that. And then we have the smallest one down here. This is with the batteries. So this is also a lot of confusion with people thinking that we are suggesting to use a battery for a long-haul flight. We are not. So we are suggesting to use that for aircraft with shorter range. But also here is this curve. So this is the fuel use, and this is the emissions. So some of these solutions down here might have actually quite a lot of aircrafts that you could sell it to. So it might be interesting to develop some of these solutions. But for the emissions, we need to think about this curve. So if we really want to do this change, we actually need to address also longer flights. So I was talking about the 4 different kind of technical solutions, but here there's also, of course, one solution where you change a little bit the way you fly. For instance, if you want to go to the US, we could definitively stop in Iceland. So I've done that several times. Of course, it's a different aircraft. So that's the another lever that you might want to use. The exciting thing about this, I mean, there's a lot of scientists working with this, but within our company, we start making estimates. So a year ago, I would say that I was not sure, if how far can we come here. But initial investigations show that we might be able to reduce the emissions from 50 to 90%, with this approach. So I think that's quite promising, and actually much more promising than I thought a year ago. So I think it is moving in the right direction. All right. So this is my last slide. Just wrapping up a little bit. Sustainable aviation here. I think it requires innovations from fuel to trust. So this is we are thinking, because there is no silver bullet, and absolutely we need to go into the fuels and also the energy, how to make fuels. We need to talk about airport power. We absolutely need to work with new engines. Either we improve the efficiency, or we have different fuels for it. And lately also we need to have electric power and propulsion systems for the shorter range. So actually this was it from my side.
Great, thank you very much, Sigurd. I think it was a very informative and clear talk. What I take with me, and maybe I should mention, we have some time for questions now, so please, people, feel free to start thinking about them, and please raise your hand so that I can give you the word, so that we keep it a bit organized. I know this is not great for discussion, but hopefully at least we can all hear each other. Now, what I wanted to say was thank you very much for that presentation, and one of the things I take with me is the impressive breadth with which Rolls-Royce is looking at this, and the breadth you sketched in terms of different options and possibilities that you are exploring. I think it's also very interesting to hear a little bit about a few things you suggested about the way in which other areas are informing also your work in the aviation business. I think it's quite impressive and interesting to see how such a big company as Rolls-Royce is able to work with innovation across these areas, and perhaps we can skip to the future faster than we would have know how to do that. Do you have any thoughts on that more specifically? I saw you talked about it a few times. Do you have any thoughts about this this ability that I quite clearly see in the way that you are approaching it with Rolls-Royce from your talk?
I think it's important to think about when you're going into something new, that you remember all the sectors where this has happened before. I mean, one thing is technology, and you might have an idea, how did you go about it, all the innovation processes, and also how we certified in other markets. So this is one thing, but the other thing is maybe around the market, that if you did this before. So for instance, in marine market, we did have some fires, and batteries, and we did experience a lot of these things. I mean, we need to be honest, when we're moving ahead, that sometimes things happens, and we need to be prepared for this. So of course, in Norway, we had our first electric aircraft falling down, the day after the Arendal weekend, in Norway. It was not great, and there was a lot of newspaper all over the place, that wrote about this incident. But this is part of the journey, that was an earlier aircraft that, is not anywhere near, where the technology will be when we have a ticket sold, So there's a massive difference when we move into a commercial aircraft compared to these early starters. But we will be influenced by them. That's the case. That everybody, we can think that we are in a different league, if you're making this aircraft or another aircraft. But the reality is that we're in the same, in the public. We will all be judged together. So these are the things, in my opinion, the learnings from others, both on the technology, but also on the market. What can we expect, in terms of dynamics.
I think you raise a very good point, and also the idea of honesty really appeals to me. Honesty when we are talking about transforming societies, and we're talking about disruptive technologies that can change the way that we live and travel and think about these things. I do agree that there's a huge sense of honesty. That a sense of honesty is very important in how you talk to the public about this, how we talk to all the stakeholders, how everybody engages with one another to make that future happen. That's a very good point. Is there anybody who would like a question from the audience? Please raise your hand and I can give you the word. Let's see, somebody is... Andreas, our esteemed project leader. Andreas, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jeroen, and thank you, Sigurd, for a very good presentation. I am, as Jeroen just said, one of the project managers of FAIR, and I was considering a question about the energy consumption of your electrical engine, and it's possible to refer how much for 1 kilometers of propulsion, so to speak, in kilowatt hours or something like that. I was also considering another part which is often lifted as a nice part with electric aviation, that is the maintenance. And what I'm wondering about is how often, perhaps in hours measured, and how expensive will this maintenance of your engine be?
Yeah, it's I don't have the number for you on per kilometer yet. We are still making that aircraft. But for the maintenance, I think that what you'll see there is that when we start looking into, let's say, electric system, full electric system, like we're testing out now with this Technum platform. Of course, it's quite simple. If we compare this to a jet engine, number of parts, for instance, and service needs, it is very different. It will be easier to maintenance and less moving parts, spares with less spare parts. So I would say for that one, I think it is clear it will be less maintenance heavy. And then with the hybrid system, it's a little bit like a car. When you put in a hybrid system there, you will still have the maintenance on the engine. And then normally the electric stuff doesn't need much. So you end up with pretty much the same as where you were. And then for that third option, if you start burning hydrogen, for instance, that's something we don't know yet. It's a kind of it's not an easy fuel, to put it that way. It has some strange behaviors as well. So for that burning hydrogen, we are looking into it. But I would say lower for electric, similar for hybrid, and a big question mark, burning hydrogen. We have no idea yet, we're still just starting to burn it, and we just see strange behaviors. So it has a tendency to go everywhere, and how will that really work in 10 years down the road? It is an interesting topic.
Thank you.
Isaac, our other project leader, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jeroen, and thank you, Sigurd. Isaac Brännström from the FAIR project. And I was, I lost my train of thought here. Sorry, I think I have to get back to you.
No worries, Isaac.
Take someone else between. Sorry.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Tommy Berg, please go ahead. Or
hello. Thanks for a really good presentation, and it was really interesting. And I was just thinking about one thing on the comparison slide. That what about the fuel cell solution? Usually in the fuel cell car there is a limitation of power related to the fuel cell itself. So for that reason, in those cars there is installed a battery to to give more capacity in the short term. Is this the same for the airplane also? So is there a big battery there, or like a mid-sized battery in there, or is it just with the fuel cell?
That's a good question. I think the fuel cell that we see has the same nature. So the ones we have been exploring so far has this kind of a bit slower reaction, as you mentioned, than the batteries. It's very fast, you know. So for us as well, we see that okay, you need probably some support around it, but we don't. I mean, that size is a good question. Is it a small or a big battery? So initially, what we've been working with is smaller batteries, of course, to supplement. But that goes into the dynamics. I mean, what do you need? In the car, I think you need to accelerate maybe very quickly, and you want to have full power immediately, and then you want to do this quite frequently. And then there's a question in an aircraft. You know, do you have that same kind of need to change a lot, or do you have more steady? If you know what I mean, your demand for power and change. How is that? You know. So that's going to be the question. If it's slow, if the dynamics in that aircraft is slow, you might get away with a very small battery. Somebody's.
Thank you.
No worries.
Some interesting background noise. I see Isaac has raised his hand again. Isaac, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I completely lost my thought. But what I was thinking about is you mentioned retrofitting as an option with retrofitting existing planes with your electric engines. And is that something you see would be possible? And is it something you see as a market?
Well, I think that this retrofit is extremely important in the early years, you know, for the because it takes a long time to have a certified aircraft. So for us, I think it's the biggest important from my point of view. It's the speed, you know, how quickly can we get into the market with technology and gain that experience. So I think from my perspective, it is more that speed into the market than a big market opportunity. I'd actually rather have a new aircraft, or like Technom, like at least something that they've just made, you know, that is a modern aircraft. You know, if I'm thinking about selling something to the market, I'd rather have that, you know, if it was up to me. But of course, there's a lot of, for instance, Dash 8 around there. But yeah, if I have the selection, I'd rather have a new aircraft.
There, thank you. Lars, please go ahead.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you for a very good presentation. I'm Lars Westin. I'm a professor at Umeå University, economics. So I would like, given your long experience of working with both electric and other sort of engines here, and what we all seems to agree about is the reduced operation cost, reduced cost of maintenance. But the question still is the capital cost, so to say. When the cost of an aircraft, electric aircraft, when it comes to the market, so to say, that we have the same benefits of scale and so compared to ordinary aircraft, will that be higher than compared to, or will also the capital cost, so to say, cost of buying a new aircraft? Will that also be low?
If I'm very honest, we don't know. Because it's the reason I'm saying that is that we haven't certified these products yet.
Yeah.
You can imagine.
But if you compare to, you have the submarines, you have what happens when you try.
Yeah, with the other markets. With the other markets, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. So but for the hybrid vessels, so these electric vessels, that's an excellent question, Lars. That is, of course, in the hybrid vessels.
We are really working with that one.
No, but then I remember, because I was also selling this stuff. So I had to change, from earlier we were selling to shipyards.
Yeah.
And I definitively had to change the sales pitch, and we started to visit the ship owners and operators.
Yeah.
And the reason is exactly as you say, that when we made these electric solutions, the OPEX went up, but the CAPEX went down. So when we had, let's say, we showed them, what kind of break-even points we had, it was typically some years, before you had that positive break-even point. And this was the reason why we had to change the sale point. You had to go to the operators or the owners. Otherwise, the shipyard would just say no, because they were always looking for the lowest capex.
Yeah.
So that was the learning from the marine side. But if it's directly transferable, that is, of course, I'm seeing the cost of the certification is the journey we just started. That's the big question. What will be the cost there? Of course, that cost needs to be paid back over the lifetime of the product. So this is what I'm a little bit uncertain about. How big would that be compared to the other markets? And we really need to see that over the next couple of years. 2-3 years.
Yeah, but you have to rethink a little, perhaps, the business model here of selling things and risk sharing and so on between airlines and US producers and other.
Now you can imagine, you look at us from Norway, but the first thing we do, we start working with Avinor immediately, because this is the way we worked in marine market. We immediately start working with them. We don't start working with an airframer because we need to have that customer interface. So we are behaving, at least the Norwegians are a little bit behaving as we have done in the other markets, just for these reasons.
Okay, thank you for that answer.
Very, very interesting. Arne, I see you've raised your hand as well. Please go ahead.
Yes, and Lars and Isak were taking all my questions, but thank you, Sigurd, for a nice presentation. But I'm thinking also about the customers, and you are used to big customer that buys a lot, but now you're in a different area. Do you see any big customer in this field, or who will buy? It's not so much small commercial aircrafts in the air, and you have put in a lot of investment in this electric dry lines, and I'm interested in how do you see your customer?
Yeah, that's it's a good question again. For us, it's for instance the Norwegian market. You can imagine. It is an early market. We see the political landscape around it. Everybody wants it. So we think also with the airport structure, with Avinor as the next speaker, we have a fantastic situation in Norway. We could meet 10 persons, and that's 10 relevant persons almost to decide, this we'll do like this. It's incredible, what we could do in a small country that's set up like that. But I think everybody know that market is not big enough. So if we only had, it's not even close. So for us, we have a global market assessment, and actually it's a lot of the US markets that's coming up as the bigger ones. But we don't necessarily think they're going to be first movers. We think that might happen up in Nordics for sure, and then maybe we can see something spreading around. But that's they've been quite active as well up to Canada. They're doing stuff. So let's see. But the question is when the big companies will start to move there. And our bigger money is of course with a little bit bigger aircraft. So not necessarily the commuter, but more when we start looking into that regional single aisle. This is where we see the big opportunity, and of course also the urban air mobility, but that's more about the volume. Because there, if you think about a big city, of course, massively, if it happens, this will be a huge market.
Thank you.
Very good. Are there any further questions from the audience? Please don't be shy. Raise your hand if you have any thoughts you would like to share.
I think maybe I want to share something with you guys. I mean, it's you asked this question around the background a little bit and what it meant, But I think also this cooperation. This is why, for me, it's important to talk like in these kind of sessions, or also in Finland or in the Nordics, because I think people don't reflect over how big these investments are. When companies are doing it, they are not doing 10 initiatives. They are maybe doing 1 or 2. So this is why I'm quite keen, to see how about, for instance, Quarken Region. How about other stuff up in Finland? Is there any opportunity here for Nordics to get to cooperate closer? I think also that's something we need to think about, because now maybe we get this test up in cold environments. It should be quite interesting for other Nordics to see if we could learn something from that. So I'll think in the future when it goes back to normal. So if you guys want to come over to Trondheim and visit and see that lab or something like that, you are absolutely more than welcome to have a visit and go more in detail. What kind of works are we doing there? That's perfectly fine and absolutely within our wishes for the future.
That's fantastic to hear, Sigurd. I think I'm really happy because this is exactly, of course, what we're trying to do with this series, with this project, to establish and help create connections like this, to learn from each other and find possibilities that we can all benefit from. So thank you very much for that openness and your participation today. If there are no further questions, then perhaps we should go to the next speaker. All right, thank you very much, Sigurd. A very good talk, very nice discussion points, and if you want to stick around for the rest, you're very welcome to, and we'll keep you posted as well. In any case,
I have to leave for another meeting, but I will keep on for 12 minutes to see the first Olav speak, and then I'll jump off. But thank you.
Thank you. Great. All right. Then we have our next speaker for today, Olav Mosvold Larsen, who is the head of Avinor's carbon reduction program, having quite a lot of experience with Avinor as the Norwegian network of airports. We are very curious to hear from him more about the way that Avinor is aiming to be carbon-free by 2050. Please, Olav, go ahead and share your thoughts.
Okay, thank you so much for the kind introduction. I can't see you anymore, but I hope and trust you can see me and that you can see the presentation.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, I think it's really interesting, as always, to listen to Sigurd and Rolls-Royce. And we actually had a little chat this morning, sort of trying to coordinate our presentations. And I think we agree that in a perfect setting, I would be first to sort of make the broad picture or background, and then Sigurd would do sort of more specific from a very serious and big aviation OEM. But now it's the other way around, and then perhaps that is fine as well, because now after hearing him talking, you might not think that I'm so sort of far off what is possible and what is not possible. So I've been challenged to tell you a little bit about the new target or goal that the Norwegian aviation industry has set, and that is to be fossil-free by 2050. And I know that in Sweden you have a target or goal of being fossil-free by 2045, So that's a little bit off, but I think it's still sort of in the same ballpark, and we have obviously many of the same airlines and the same technologies available. So at least this is the Norwegian aviation industry's take on the task. So for those of you who don't know our company, we are responsible for 44 airports throughout Norway, and we're also the national ANSP. And I think we always try to say this, that Norway is totally dependent on aviation, and perhaps also parts of the world is. Then you can obviously discuss like how much do you need to travel? Are we traveling more than necessary? How much will other people travel in the future? But this presentation will focus on the technology options and the technological solutions to reduce the carbon emissions from our industry. And the reason for us working on this is quite simple, actually. It's that we've been aware, like many other people, for a couple of decades, how such a serious situation we are in on the globe, on planet Earth. And I really like this photo, actually, because it somehow illustrates how lonely we are in space, in the universe, and also how sort of small and how interconnected we are. I guess you see Madagascar in the middle of the picture here, and I think it's another cool thing about this picture is that it was shot by one of the first Apollo missions to the moon. So it's also sort of a indirectly evidence of what humankind can actually manage if we decide to do something. And I really believe that we can make aviation fossil free within the next couple of decades, but that will need investments and cooperation and determination. But I really don't think we actually have an option. So what is the alternative is kind of a question you could ask. I'm sure you've seen this drawing before, but you know, 1 year on, I still kind of like it because, as I mentioned with in the previous picture of the blue marble, we have some serious challenges coming up, and we have to sort of look beyond the short-term crisis and the short-term problems we have with the virus and all that, and this is just like what we're seeing now is just perhaps peanuts of what we can see looming in the future. So from Norway's or from the Norwegian aviation point of view, we've been working on these issues together, the airlines and the airport operator and the Confederation of Norwegian labor unions and also Confederation of Norwegian aviation industry. So we've been working together on these challenges for the last 13-14 years, actually, and I'll get a little bit back to that later. But what is sort of new now is that we've agreed on a target that I mentioned in the beginning of my talk. So, this is in Norwegian, and sorry. I would also like to state in the beginning, I would have loved to talk to you with, for hours and hours on what we're doing at the airports to reduce the carbon emissions. We have a goal of being fossil free by 2030 on our 44 airports, but we have to save that for a later talk, because I suspect that you're more interested in emissions from the industry. So sort of the good news, thanks to some of the work that Sigurd and Rolls-Royce is doing, and the airframers, and also a lot of different things going on, the emissions per passenger kilometer has been decreasing significantly over the last couple of decades. It's more than halved from the Norwegian airlines, at least. This is an average of SAS and Norwegian, so perhaps I should say Scandinavian airlines. But the total emissions from the industry is growing, and that is because the amount, at least until the virus hit us, the traffic growth outpaces the energy efficiency measures that's being implemented. So we will have to do something beyond business as usual to actually turn this curve and make it point downwards. And I think it's Sigurd says it, and we all say it, that in the aviation industry there is sort of no silver bullet. We will have to work on different solutions, at least in terms of technology. And I'll touch upon all of these a little bit, not so much on energy efficient aircraft and sustainable aviation fuels. I'll put a little bit more emphasis on new technologies, electrification and hydrogen, because I think that perhaps is of most interest for this webinar. But we could talk a lot about all of these solutions. So as I mentioned, the aircraft are getting more and more energy efficient. The engines are getting more and more energy efficient. A lot of improvements and a lot of huge investments from the airlines. I heard the discussions on capex and opex and all this, and obviously these are huge investments from the airlines into best available technology in terms of aircraft. And also upgrades and maintenance and all this. So when we're talking of sort of what is the range and what is needed where and when, and I'll just chime in with what Sigurd just said, that we will need multiple technologies on the short haul, very short haul network and flights. Battery electric can be, and also for general aviation, battery electric is a very viable option and solution, somewhere between 2025 and 2030. And I think I think we should also keep in mind when discussing all these new energy carriers and solutions that although batteries are heavy, it's also a very energy efficient way of sort of storing energy. Producing hydrogen is energy intensive, and also storing hydrogen is heavy. So we will see what comes out as the preferred solution. From Avinor's point of view, we're an airport operator. We are technology agnostic, to put it like that. We just would like to see zero and very low emission solutions in the Norwegian airspace and in the Norwegian aviation system. On more regional routes, hybrid electric fuel cell solutions will probably come into market around 2030, perhaps earlier. There will perhaps be a little share of hydrocarbons. That could be a sustainable aviation or sustainable hydrocarbons made of made of biofuels or electrofuels. And I also think it's important to keep in mind here that although we're talking about hybrid solutions, many of the really short flights could be flown 100% electric if there is batteries on board. So there's sort of not like a black and white picture here. It's different markets, different routes will perhaps find different solutions. But I think the whole aviation industry agrees that given the technologies we have at hand today, we will be dependent on sustainable aviation fuels for a long time to come. Both because of the range that the new modern aircraft have. You can fly 16,000, 18,000 kilometers from Europe to Australia without stopovers, and also keeping in mind how many aircraft are already in the market that will be in the market for the coming decades. So also focusing on producing and developing sustainable aviation fuels is extremely important in this picture. And sustainable aviation fuels has been sort of a solution for quite some years now. I started working with Avinor in 2007, and I remember vaguely in those days that there was a big discussion, at least in Norway, about biodiesel for cars. That was first generation biodiesel. They had issues with it in the north, where it was cold during winter and it was sort of freezing. All those issues, and there were so many people came up to me and said, well, biofuels will never be possible for aviation because it's so cold out there, and it will never be possible. And then just a couple of years later, it was actually certified for use in civil air traffic. And the the good thing about them is that they can be dropped into the current aircraft and infrastructure. Not really any investments needed. But the not so good thing about them is that price and cost is significantly higher than fossil fuels, and currently production is low. So we will have to see some development here, and there will be development, and we are really excited to sort of be part of that journey. We've been doing this for a little while in Norway now, and I think maybe what interesting thing is that already last year Norway became the first country in the world where it was implemented a drop-in mandate for advanced biofuels, and as far as I understand, we are looking into something similar coming into force in Sweden midsummer. We've had a lot of discussions on that, obviously, and there's also very serious discussions about implementing some kind of drop-in mandate also in the European Union. So there will be papers and reports coming out from the Commission during April or May. That's at least that's the rumor. So the governments are trying to make a market for sustainable aviation fuels, and we would need a separate seminar to discuss the pros and cons of using that kind of incentives and policy instruments to actually speed up the transition. So talking about these new technologies, and electrification has been high on the agenda for a while in the Nordics, and I think that's extremely interesting. This is very similar to a slide that Sigurd showed, and I think he perhaps has left us now for his other meeting. So sort of along the same lines, we have in Norway, we have made at least from Avinor and the civil aviation authorities, we have a definition of electrified aircraft, and that is aircraft with one or more electric motors for propulsion in the air, and they need electricity from somewhere, whether it's battery or fuel cell or some kind of hybrid solutions, and but it's still like an electrified aircraft. There are Rolls-Royce is one of the kids on the block here, but there are more than 200, as far as I know, projects ongoing worldwide related to electrification of aviation. I will not delve into all of them. I'll give a few examples, but first tell a little bit about our story, how we sort of started working on this from Avinor and the Norwegian aviation point of view. So the first time I heard about an electric aircraft was this one, a Kvarken that flew in 2010, and I thought, like, well, maybe sort of wait and watch, monitor, see what this will develop into. And then, at least from all the market intelligence I was able to gather, not that much happened the next years. But in 2015, the same guys that flew the Kvarken actually crossed the English Channel, and that was a key moment for us in Avinor, because that flight was something like 72 kilometers from an airport in the UK to an airport in France, and that is longer than many of the flights carried out on the Norwegian network today that is actually flown commercially. So a few years later, we decided to buy this aircraft. I think we ordered it in 2018 and had delivery of it in 2019, and we flew it for 2 summers, and then we had a motor failure, so we had to make an emergency landing, and unfortunately that had to we had to land in a small lake, a small pond. But we have now ordered a new similar aircraft, but sort of the successor of this one, the Pipistrel Velis. And what I think is key here is that this little aircraft has almost 130 kilometers or somewhere in that range, and that is definitely something, or a range that can be operated on some of the shortest flights in Norway. I don't have such a lovely map that you have in the Kvarken network, but this is not so far away from you guys. And here is Bodø, one of the main cities in the northern part of Norway, and the radius out of Bodø. And you can see quite a few airports within 350 kilometers range of Bodø, which I think many believe is feasible range with the battery technology that will be available within the next couple of years, and that could possibly be the first certified electric aircraft for use in civil aviation. You're aware of Heart Aerospace. Anders and the guys are talking about somewhere around 400 kilometers range. Really hope they succeed in achieving that, because this aircraft could be a fantastic vehicle for some of these markets or some of these routes. But it's not only Bodø. I don't know if you see my arrow here. Maybe I should make a circle with a pen. I just showed you this one, this area. But it's also, like Sigurd said, some interesting stuff, interesting area here. And there are also city pairs that can be connected. And then obviously the very short flights in the very cold region of Finnmark, or challenging, at least in terms of weather conditions here. Many quite interesting markets where fully electric or hybrid electric aircraft can really do a decent job. Widerøe is the main, or is almost the only regional carrier, and you see here that, at least it's a slide I've borrowed or stolen from them. They say that they have 249 city pairs that they're flying today that are shorter than 300 kilometers. So they definitely see a market for these new aircraft. But this is not enough to sort of really reduce the total emissions from the Norwegian aviation industry. So hydrogen is getting more and more tailwind. You probably heard about ZeroAvia, American startup, but now moved some of their operations to the UK for testing, flying on the fuel cell with a lot greater range than 350 kilometers. You heard about the very ambitious and extremely interesting projects from Airbus. This is a fuel cell solution that could be, I guess, perfect for some of the regional flights in Norway, and not least they're also discussing variants of hydrogen hybrid solutions for longer flights that could perhaps replace the single aisle aircraft we see today, the 737s and the A320s, with up to 200 passengers and a range of up to 2,000 nautical miles. At least this is the ambition of Airbus, and from a Scandinavian or Nordic point of view, that will take us quite far. 1,000 kilometers will take some of us almost to London, but if we get 2,000 nautical miles, almost 4,000 kilometers, it will cover all European flights from the Nordic countries. And that's a huge chunk of the markets in the Nordic countries. So extremely interesting and promising projects ongoing there. And I must also say a few words about hydrogen. It is currently, with the technology of today, fairly energy intensive to produce, and it can be used in a whole different range of solutions for aviation. It's a very convenient energy carrier. I mentioned already fuel cells and direct combustion or hybrid solutions. So the first and the fourth of these bullet points, but it's already used today in production of sustainable aviation fuels. And then electrofuels is coming up also as an interesting solutions. And we see so much going on in the hydrogen domain now, not only in the Nordics, but also in sort of worldwide. So this is something that we will monitor very closely in the future. And I think it's also important to emphasize here, and that might be one of the key points from an airport operator and air navigation service provider, that we have to work together on this. New energy carriers will impact the whole aviation system in terms of the operational capacity of the aircraft, the energy needed will have to be refueled or refilled or recharged somehow at the airports. And we are doing quite a lot of work on that internally in Avinor. And I know they're doing the same in Swedavia, and also other airport operators around the world are really looking into this now. So it's extremely promising, and I think it's fair to say that the airports has an ambition that we will not sort of be the bottleneck here. We will, and I think, at least speaking for Norwegian airports and perhaps also for my colleagues around the world, that we would really like to see this happen, and we will do whatever we can to help speed up the transition. A little bit back to the work we've been doing on the fossil-free aviation goal. This was initiated in 2007. We're working together with the main sort of stakeholders in the Norwegian aviation industry. And we've also teamed up with the green groups, the environmental NGOs in Norway, for quite a few years. And they've been part of these processes, not only on these reports that we've been writing, but also on other projects and processes related to sustainable aviation fuels and electrification. And the first work we've been doing on this, so to speak, has been mainly sort of like facts and projections and rather descriptive. There has been a need to sort of agree on what is left and what is right, or what is sort of the basic facts here. And but now in last year, we actually also managed to agree on a common goal and a roadmap on how to get there. And when discussing this with people from outside the Nordics, some people think this is science fiction, but we believe that this is actually very much doable. I think it's important that some important points about the context here. We are in the outskirts of Europe, so we're totally dependent on aviation. And also, as it says in this little pie here, I don't know if you can see the numbers on your screens, but only 10%, at least in Norway, of the fuel uplifted in Norway for aviation is for long-haul flights. So both, at least in Norway, I'll keep it with that, 40% of the fuel uplifted here is for domestic purposes, and then the remaining half is for flights to Europe. And I guess that also in this chart includes Sweden and Denmark. So quite a few flights are fairly short, and that also explains, I think, a lot of the interest we see in new energy carriers and electrification in the Nordic countries and in Norway specifically. So the goal is to be fossil-free by 2050. I already mentioned some minutes ago that the airports will be fossil-free by 2030. Swedavia actually managed to be fossil-free already for 2020. We have a little bit different methodology, but this is an extremely fantastic achievement by our brothers and sisters in Swedavia. Fantastic achievements. And I also think that, looking ahead to 2050, to have a credible roadmap all the way there, it's not possible. So we have focused together with the airlines on some 2030 goals, and they are listed here on the left of the screen. And I think I should also comment a little bit on the projections here. And we've been doing a lot of work on sustainable aviation fuels over the years, and just if we use what is available of waste and residues from the forestry industry, we could perhaps produce up to 350-400 million liters of sustainable aviation fuels in Norway for aviation. And that would sort of take 30-40% of all the fuel uplifted today. And then in this light green, which is electrification, and we say that is including hydrogen fuel cells, and then perhaps also a little share of hydrogen direct combustion when we get closer to 2050. So these are sort of projections that we've made. I'm sure they will be revised. That's actually one of the things we will do in the future, revise and update this chart. So we'll see how this all turns out. But I think it also must be said already here that that these are costly but very necessary emission reductions. And I also think it's important to state that the aviation industry is highly competitive, so it's important to create some kind of level playing field. It is not possible for the Norwegian or the Nordic or the Swedish aviation industry alone to take this development forward. So cooperation is key, not only between airlines and airports, but also between the aviation industry and states. So public-private partnerships will also be key, we believe, in the future. So we have now agreed on an ambitious goal and a roadmap. We will benchmark and revise and develop this work, and we are lucky to have dedicated airlines and top management support. We're working on a program for sustainable aviation fuels. We're trying to establish a test center for zero and low emission aviation. And I think maybe some of the key takeaways from what we've been doing in this work is that we've had a very transparent and fact-based approach, including the green groups and the labor unions, and also the trade unions. So to wrap up, we are totally dependent on aviation. We have to reduce the emissions, and there are technology solutions available, but they must be developed and then in cooperation within the aviation industry and also in public-private partnerships. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Olav. Another very good and clear presentation. I take your point that you had discussed with Sigurd to switch the order as a good feedback, but I also think that it worked quite well in this case also to have you build upon a broad perspective laid by Sigurd and to expand it as you did quite well, showing the many different aspects that become part of this challenge. Also, the high ambitions, I think, are really nice to be so boldly stated, and that you show also something, the long history of collaboration and all the efforts that have been made to create a platform for this ambition now to be launched stronger. Yeah, I really appreciate that. So thank you very much for that presentation. I think we see already some questions popping up. So if you don't mind, I think we should just go towards that. Jeroen, you were first. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I live in Torsby, which is a small city that is not that far away from Oslo. So I'm hoping we will have electric aviation going between to and from Torsby to Oslo. But I actually had another question around the sustainable aviation fuel. When looking at it today, the very small amounts that's available, you can see that I guess that's the biggest manufacturer, which is Neste, still haven't been able to stop using products from the palm tree. And yeah, they really seem to struggle to show that they can actually really call it sustainable. And I was thinking, what are your thoughts on this, and also compared to electrofuels? Which one do you think will be the winner in the end? Will it be sustainable aviation fuel based on biomass, or will it be from other types of via the electrofuels from electricity, and then producing some kind of fuel with the help of liquid fuel from electricity?
If I knew I could be rich, isn't that what you say? Pardon me. I think Neste will have to answer the question about palm oil and the biomass they are sourcing, and I assume that at least before they had some quite extensive information on that on their website. But I can say that from the Norwegian aviation industry, we have always stated or always demanded that the fuel uplifted for aviation in Norway will have to be without palm oil or palm oil products. And the same goes for the biodiesel we're using at the airports. So we've made a very clear statement in terms of sustainability and raw materials used in the sourcing of biomass. But I think this is, these are key challenges that will have to be solved somehow, and that the aviation industry alone cannot solve. There is a huge, I don't know if competition, or there is at least a lot of industries that would like to use biomass in the future. Road transport is one thing. You have the food and fodder industries, and then there's all these issues with land use change, and this is quite complicated actually. That is well beyond sort of at least my intellectual level. And as an airport operator, we are sort of dependent on also the states and the governments to make decent legislation to avoid not favorable outcomes of when producing and sourcing sustainable aviation fuels. And I think I've said a couple of times that it will never be like sort of a Saudi Arabia for biofuels. You will have to use biomass from the different regions. In some regions, it could be municipal solid waste. I mentioned Norway, and the same goes for Sweden and Finland, and perhaps Canada and Russia. Forestry residues could actually be a very sustainable source of biomass, and other places it could be different sources. But I think it just came out yesterday or a couple of days ago, a new report asking questions about used cooking oil. So I think whatever you do with biofuels, there will be sustainability discussions related to it. And I think perhaps also that will go for electrofuels in the future. It's fairly energy intensive to produce. So you'll need quite a massive amount of renewable energy or electricity for electrolyzing hydrogen, because you don't want to go down sort of the natural gas and gray hydrogen road. And then there's also a question about where do you get the carbon? Will that only delay if you get carbon from, let's say, a big factory? That will only sort of delay the emissions of the carbon. So we will have quite a few interesting discussions here on both hydrogen and carbon, whether these are sustainable, and whether this is sort of the last breath of the fossil fuel industry, or whether this is something that can really be turned into something truly renewable and sustainable in the future. So hundreds of hours of webinars coming up discussing these issues, I think. But extremely good question, and those who survive will see.
Thanks, Olav.
Oh, Jeroen, you're muted.
Thank you for pointing it out. No, I said very interesting question, a very interesting answer. It is indeed a very, very big challenge, and I like also the complexity we're starting to unpack of this kind of challenges. Arne, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. We work a lot with biofuels, but I have some questions about the charging at the airports. And I'm wondering, Avinor, are you going to invest in chargers at all your airport? And will there be any national subsidies for that, or will Avinor take the extra cost? Or will you hand it over to the electric flights that will pay for it? Or are the energy companies in Norway, are they interested to sell their electricity on your places? Or
yeah, we'll see. What we have said is that we will take the responsibility for having charging or new energy carriers available when demanded by the airlines or aircraft operators and the aircraft producers. And then it is not yet decided whether it should be operated or invested in by us as airport operator. And you mentioned a few stakeholders that could be interested in this. It could be sort of the main electricity producers, the utility providers. It could be the handling companies. We know that the fuel producers and the fuel suppliers are interested in this domain. So every time there is sort of a disruption, technological disruption in the market, this also opens up new opportunities for a whole wide range of stakeholders and companies. So we will see how that actually pans out. But at least what we're doing from Avinor's side is that we are, and I hope I mentioned that in my talk, that we have mapped out all the electricity supply and the electricity consumption at our airports in close cooperation, I think, with 27 different utility providers in Norway, and we will keep updating that mapping, so we can be prepared for charging not only aircraft. And I think at least on the smaller airports, that will not be maybe a big hurdle. It will also be charging of electric cars in the car parks, electric buses, electric ground equipment. So it's also a question here to sort of shave the peaks in the morning when these electric aircraft need charging, and also all the passengers arrive at the airport with their cars. So we also have a couple of projects ongoing to sort of smooth out the peaks, and we're working a little bit on the microgrids and sort of all this new very interesting questions arising when you have technological disruptions that are now on the horizon.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good. Lars, I see you also have another question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you once again for inspiring presentation, Olav. I have a couple of questions, so if someone else wants to stop me, so you're welcome. But we start with, I would like to start with a question that really perhaps is not, it's your problem, and it has to do with the, so to say, the route or line structure in Norway now when you get electric commuter train or commuter aircraft or regional aircraft. Do you think that the airlines will change, so to say, their hub spoke or network structure? Will there be more? You talked about Bodø, for instance, up can that be developed to a more regional hub where you aggregate a lot of flows to, and then you have other larger aircraft to rate returns to scale and so? Or do you have any thoughts about how do you think they will react to this? Yeah.
Well, we have a lot of thoughts about that, both in terms of electrification and hybrid solutions and hydrogen, because it depends on the range and the size of the aircraft available. And well, maybe if there is an airline around the table, maybe they could answer. But I think every airline will try to optimize the use of their aircraft as much as possible. And if you have an aircraft with 38 seats, you will have to find a way to sort of fill up those seats in the most efficient manner. And the same goes if you have an aircraft with 9 seats or 19 seats. So I think you will probably see a change in the route network, because if we get different size aircrafts and also with different capabilities. And then it's like charging is one thing, because with the current battery technology, you will probably have to charge, maybe not fully, but at least recharge quite a lot every time you land. So we might, with the current technology status, you might need to charge everywhere. But if hydrogen will play a bigger role in the future, with a higher energy content and bigger range, perhaps you will not need hydrogen available at all airports. So then you could probably, at least in the beginning, see more of like a hub-spoke solution or a hub-spoke situation in terms of hydrogen. And I also think it's important to keep in mind here that although if these aircraft are actually developed and certified for use in commercial air traffic, they cannot produce like 100,000 aircraft overnight. So you'll have to start somewhere quite slowly. And if Airbus succeeds, we'll see who will be the first aircraft operator, the first airline using them, and then it will have to be discussions. So on what routes will those first aircraft be used, and then we as the airport operator and everybody working in the ecosystem of the aviation industry will have to sort of figure out, okay, so where should we put our investments in terms of hydrogen facilities, if that is will be in question. But this will have to be done. We'll have to do this together, and that's why we're trying to state as often as we can that cooperation is key here, and that's the signal we get from everybody we talk to. And also Airbus and the airlines are quite clear on that they cannot do this alone. They also need somewhere to land with their aircraft, and I think that's where an airport operator plays a sort of crucial role.
Thank you.
I don't know if that was an answer, but the question is huge, and
no, I do agree. It's the beginning of a discussion, of course. If I compare, so here according to my knowledge here in Sweden, if we see the development, the smaller aircraft has almost disappeared from the Swedish market. It was 1990s and so there were some attempts to have 8-seat line aircraft and so, but they have almost disappeared. But they can come back. But I think perhaps if that would imply then also that the landing and starting fee structure has to be changed in order to make it easier for really small aircraft to be part of a route network, so to say. I guess, Do you have any thoughts about that, about changing the landing of fee structure? Do you think you have an optimal sort of structure already? I mean, the discussion here, if I have talked to people that previously have had small aircraft and have smaller airlines and so, they say the fees at the Swedavia airport just made it impossible to continue. Swedavia is perhaps not here, so they can answer, but have you comment on that?
Yeah, well, I don't, depending on who you ask, I don't think you'll ever find sort of the optimal charging system, and it all depends on who you ask as well. I mean, even the airlines are not always do not always agree about the airport charges system, and that's sort of a trade-off. The airport or the aeronautical charges are twofold, like very broadly. It's like it's a fee for using the infrastructure, like runways and taxiways and that stuff, and it's also it's supposed to cover the direct costs of that, and it's supposed to cover the direct costs of having adequate terminal and safety, security, all that kind of stuff available. And with a new EU regulation that came out a few years back, the aeronautical charges will have to be sort of figured out or set in a very transparent manner with the main users of the airspace and the airports around the table, and we'll see in the future how new technology will also impact the charging system, because if somebody pays less, then others will perhaps have to pay more. So we'll see. But yes, I'm sure there will be adjustments to the charging system or to the aeronautical charges. There's already is adjustments almost year on year.
If I add, can it be a development if, as it's said, that electric aircraft will have shorter landing tracks, and so that we can have, so they say, so to say, smaller airports with smaller terminals and very easy in and out, so to say, almost like it was once upon a time, so to say, very small terminals that more frequent of that sort of that really is only flying to nearest larger airport.
Yeah,
would that be a development for all your islands, so to say? Yeah.
That's one of many scenarios for the future, but also keep in mind that a lot of people flying on these very short routes, they're going somewhere bigger, so they have connecting flights. So sort of it's not possible to mix what we call dirty and clean passengers. So you know how all this works. So there are pros and cons for all of this. Yeah.
Yes, but this integration of dirty and clean passengers has to be very smooth if you should be competitive, I think, also then. Yeah. So that is also a new request on terminals to have that precision.
Yep.
Okay, I leave the floor to Arne before I take my last one. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lars. Very good input into this discussion. Arne, please go ahead.
Yeah, we have some state-procured flying routes in Sweden. Do you have the same in Norway, or?
Yes, we have more.
More or a lot?
Yeah, we have a lot. We have a lot.
Yeah.
Public service obligation routes. I think Norway is the country in Europe with the highest amount of PSO routes. Yeah. And I've seen some of your discussions in Sweden about using SAF on the PSO routes, and there is now ongoing discussions in Norway also about sort of what kind of technologies one could require from airlines that will fly on these PSO routes in the future. So that's a very interesting discussion, actually.
It could also be electric. And I think maybe you have an easier, because you're not in EU, you can do as you want. That we cannot. You can't.
I'm afraid not.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. It's quite heavy discussions about state support legislation and all this kind of stuff. So not easy. No.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Lars, did you have another question, or is the hand?
Yeah. If no one is taking up the hand, so I can continue. Yes, since one of the major financiers of our project is the Quarken Council, and working for the over the strait here, and they are also interested in working towards Mo i Rana and so in Norway. And it's always interesting this when we have someone from Avinor, and we have Swedavia, and we have Finavia, and so. And it would be interesting to have sort of a regional airline network on a Nordic level. I mean, it's very national. You are planning national, and Swedavia is planning national, and the airlines also are very national, and they have a scale that are on aircraft that's quite large. That seems to be a problem for this cross-border. Do you have any thoughts about that? So to say that we could have roads, as you show, roads from Bodø or the new airport in Mo over to Lycksele or Umeå, Skellefteå, and further on to Helsinki and so on.
Well, I'm not a traffic developer, and I think there's sort of a general theme here that if there is a market, it would also probably be a route that can be operated. There has been quite a few attempts to do something in Finnmark and the northern part of Finland and over to Russia, I think, to make some kind of triangle routes there. That has not succeeded. And so, but yes, maybe this could change in the future if we have different size aircraft and different economies in both capex and opex in operating these new aircraft. But I think you should not keep. I mean, I understand that ideally it should be like a daily flight or two from between many cities, but you need people who are willing to travel between those cities to actually make a route, and quite a few. So this is something that you can look into, and the catchment area of some of these airports are at some places it's fairly big, and some places it's limited, to put it like that. So we'll see about that. But in terms of cooperation between the national airport operators, we keep in fairly close contact with both Finavia and Swedavia, and there's a whole lot of discussion going on already about standardization of charging infrastructure, everything like that, and I think we all agree, and that this also goes back to the DNA of the aviation industry, that standardization is key to actually make this happen. So right now it's perhaps a little bit premature to make sort of decisions on what will be the charging standards, will be that socket or this socket, and what will sort of be the solution in the future. But I can assure you that we will work together with our colleagues in Sweden and Finland on this to make sure that the infrastructure is in place.
Thank you.
Very good. Then I see we have a question from Yuri. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Jeroen. I just wanted to add to that the cooperation of the airport authorities, like Olav rightly mentioned. I think there needs to be also a lot of more cooperation with the airlines, right? Because we're all saying, yes, they might not be interested in certain routes, but I think if the right network is proposed and the airlines actually all indicate what type of aircraft would be suitable to their business model, I think it would indeed be possible. I was just wondering if, for instance, for this forum, have the airlines of the Nordics all been invited, and were they not able to make it? I'm often in these fora missing the airlines' voice, or are they just too busy with their current crisis to participate?
Well, I can give you a small comment on the last part, Yuri. We are trying to see how we can arrange that, but so far it's not really worked yet. But we are trying to figure out how to invite them also to this forum.
That would be great. I think that would be a very valuable perspective from the business side.
Absolutely. Thank you for that contribution. Do we have any other burning questions for Olav at this point? Okay, well, if there's no more hands coming up, I think we can close today's session a little bit early. First of all, thank you, Olav, for your talk and your willingness to share your thoughts on the many questions that came by. I'm going to share my screen just to wrap this up from the perspective of the FAIR project. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so this was the 4th seminar in a series, and we will continue this series. And I think now that you have all been here today, you will be part of the mailing list and receive information about upcoming events. The next seminar escapes me at the moment, but we will continue to try and cover different elements of the very complex challenge that is electric regional aviation. If you want to have more information about the competence network or the seminar series, you can contact my colleague Carita Roslund, who is in charge of organizing these. The project management for the FAIR project, we are very open for connections within the FAIR project. This is the purpose of this competence network, to spread our competence between each other. So if you want to reach out and find ways of discussing or collaborating with the FAIR project as a whole, you can contact Andreas or Isaac at Tirains, who are project managing. And then you have here the contact information for the specific work packages, who are also very open for discussion, collaboration, feedback, what have you. Then you can find us on LinkedIn if you search for FAIR Promoting Electric Aviation, the place where we will be continuously posting updates from the project, as well as these seminars and events, hoping to have also more in the future. With that, I want to thank you again for all your participation and your attention, and hope to see you at the next FAIR seminar.